Hey everybody, signing in from our back porch for devotional number 2 during this season of being separated from one another. And today what I'd like to do is reflect for a few minutes on the theme of the mystery of God. One of the questions that's been asked for centuries and wrestled over is if God is simultaneously good on the one hand and in control of everything on the other hand, then what are we supposed to do with suffering? What are we supposed to think about it? We live in a time of great pain right now. Public health is in crisis. There is an economic crisis all over the world and in local communities. There's social isolation, which we know is not only bad for emotional health, but even for physical health, to be isolated from other human beings. We're not made to be alone. We're made to be connected. And so with all of this and the other suffering and pain that is being experienced all over the world and in our own lives, the question of the ages remains, if there is a God, then what on earth is he doing? If he's both good and sovereign, in control of all things, then what on earth is he good? What on earth is he doing? And there's this quote that I'd like to read for us from Yale philosopher Nicholas Walterstorff. He wrote a book called Lament for a Son, and it was his way of processing. It was like this long letter to God, processing his pain and sorrow and lament of losing his son, his 25-year-old son Eric, to a rock climbing accident. And he said this. He's questioning God. He says, "How is faith to endure, O God, when you allow all this scraping and tearing on us? You've allowed rivers of blood to flow, mountains of suffering to pile up, sobs to become humanity's song, all without lifting a finger that we could see. You've allowed bonds of love beyond number to be painfully snapped. If you've not abandoned us, explain yourself. We strain to hear." It's a pretty relatable quote for anybody who believes in the existence of God and who has experienced suffering. Suffering for the human race is the rule. It's not the exception. One person out of every one person is going to die. The mortality rate is 100%. If we look at the Bible, we see that suffering is a theme all throughout the Bible. Every single book of the Bible was written by somebody who was enduring excruciating suffering. The one book that was written by the person who was on the top of the world and experiencing great success was Ecclesiastes. Written by a man who was very wealthy. He had everything that a person could ever wish for that this earth could offer, and the theme of that book is vanity. It's all vanity. It's vapor. Even at the heights, suffering happens on the inside when we realize that all the toys and all the things, as the hymn says, all the vain things that charm us most don't deliver on what they promise. Sex, money, power, they leave us empty when we build our lives around them. But every other book in the Bible is written by a sufferer. You've got even the history of Israel that points this out. All the way back in the days of Exodus, you've got Israel being held in captivity to Pharaoh in Egypt, and then later on captured and taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, and then later on captured and taken into captivity by Tiglath-Pileser's Assyria. And then it continues into the New Testament, where even the writers of the New Testament are writing many of the letters that they write from jail. They've experienced beatings. 11 of the 12 disciples ended up dying as martyrs for their faith. The whole Bible, suffering is a theme. Exile, jail, persecution, illness, where Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 12 about his thorn in the flesh. But there's this remarkable book, this remarkable letter in the New Testament called Philippians, and it's one of Paul's what they call prison letters. He writes it while incarcerated because of his faithfulness to Jesus. And Philippians is widely known as this letter written from jail that is also known as the epistle or the letter of joy. That's where Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice." And it's also the letter where he says, give thanks in everything to God. From one of the lowest circumstantial places imaginable, here Paul is accessing this inner resource of joy that's come to him from Jesus and the gospel. I remember early in my years as a pastor, this is probably like my 7th or 8th year serving as a pastor of a church, and there was a gentleman named Brian who was 35 years old, and he was dying of a surprise rare form of cancer, and it was a violent cancer that took him fairly quickly. And one of the things that struck me every time I visited and had conversation with Brian was the joy that he carried with him. He seemed to not be afraid of death. He seemed not to be morose. He was, of course, sobered and of course didn't enjoy what he was suffering. He got angry at his cancer. But he had this quiet confidence and trust in the faithfulness and kindness and goodness and sovereignty of God in all things. And one day I asked him, I said, Brian, what's your secret, man? Like you're dying and you seem more joyful than I feel a lot of the time. And he said, I've learned through wrestling with this cancer and with my coming death, I've learned what it means to thank God for the good that I cannot see. To thank God for the good that I cannot see. That brought to mind that verse in the book of Hebrews where it says that faith is the evidence of things that we hope for, and it's being certain of things that we do not see. And those things that we do not see are the promises of God, especially the future promises of God, which I referred to in last week's reflection. Of a future resurrected reality for the people of God in the new heaven and the new earth. We get the picture of it in Revelation 21 and 22, where it says there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. We sing about it, world without end. Our best days are always ahead of us. That's what the gospel promises us. Our best days are never behind us, friends, always ahead of us because of Jesus and his death, burial, and resurrection. We, like Brian, can thank God, even in a season like the one we're in right now, for the good that we can't see, precisely because of the good that we can see, and that's the work that Jesus has accomplished for us already on the cross, where he says it is finished, and then he promises this glorious future that Romans 8 and Revelation 21 and 22 and so many other scriptures tell us about. Jesus dying on the cross was the worst injustice. It was the worst hardship, the worst sorrow that's ever happened in the history of the world. And out of that great injustice has come the greatest good, which points again to the good that we can't see necessarily right now. But if we were able to see and know everything that God does, we would start to experience this kind of peace and rest and certainty and confidence, even in the middle of affliction, that my friend Brian experienced in his cancer. And so in light of that, what I'd like to do is finish this devotional with a short reading from Isaiah chapter 55. And let's let these be the verses we meditate on this week. Isaiah 55, 6 through 9. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, says the Lord, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. It's not lost on me, and I hope it's not lost on you, that these words were written by a man whose life was filled with only suffering. Only suffering. And Isaiah was eventually sawn in two by people who did not appreciate the message of God that he was bringing to Israel. And yet these words of trust and deference to the wisdom and knowledge and power and goodness of God in all circumstances. I pray that will be your hope this week as you wrestle with these uncertain times. Much love to you, friends. Grace and peace.